Joining me now to get you across the news of the day is Nine radio broadcaster, host of Overnights, Michael McLaren, and Sky's NT Bureau Chief, Matt Cunningham. Gentlemen, welcome. And Michael, these floods, we'll start with them. They didn't start when the PM was in the country. Of course, they started while he was away. And you heard me just then, PMs have to travel. But he's copping a fair amount of flack, and he's got another trip coming up on Friday. I think people want their PM a bit more focused on issues at home, don't they?
Well, I'm sure that's right, Peter. Good evening to you and to Matt. Look, I suppose what you would say to Anthony Albanese and others now is perhaps you reap what you sow. I mean, when Scott Morrison, heaven forbid, took his family to Hawaii for a holiday, like it's a crime, many of them piled on and said, where is he? He's not holding a hose. The unions ran a campaign with that slogan during the election, rather effectively too, it has to be said. Well, now we've got floods and people are saying, well, why isn't Anthony Albanese holding a bucket? I mean, what it shows is both the arguments were ridiculous and superfluous. We have an enormous government, a cabinet where you're more likely to be in it than out of it, and a huge public service. There's plenty of people that can deal with these matters. Most of it, of course, as we knew with the fires, is based at the state level. But, you know, when you start fingering the ex-government because they weren't there in person, then I suppose you've got to expect a bit of blowback. But I think back then and now, both arguments were nonsense.
Part of the problem, Matt, is he doesn't really have a strong number two when he's away. I mean, he said today it's not a one-person show, but, you know, John Howard had people the calibre of Tim Fischer and John Anderson, plus he had Peter Costello when he was away, Kevin Rudd, he was away a lot, he had Julia Gillard and she certainly stepped up. I don't think Richard Marles is filling that leadership vacuum, and the one person who could, Tanya Plibersek, you know, she has a strong profile in Australia, she's been put in the freezer. What would you advise him to do?
Well, I don't think that was a good move to put Tanya Plibersek in the freezer as you describe it. I mean, to give her the environment portfolio, there's no doubt most people saw that as a demotion for Tanya Plibersek, and there's no doubt that I would say that she is one of, if not the strongest performers in the Labor cabinet. As for Richard Marles, I think he's lost his mojo a little bit, but I think he has the potential to gain it. Richard Marles, I think he was shaken up a little bit by the criticism he copped over his links to China during the election campaign, but he is someone who, you know, he's not an ideologue. He's someone who could appeal to a broad number of voters. He just seems to have lost his confidence. He needs to find that pretty quickly, I think, to give Anthony Albanese that support that he really needs.
Look, I absolutely agree with you. I had a lot of time for Marles. I think he's really struggled in the last 6 months. Let's see if he can come back. Michael, the point you were making before about what Labor says in opposition and then how they're trying to reframe things in government was only a couple of months ago. Albo was out there very critical of Scott Morrison for not declaring a national emergency in relation to those Queensland floods. Have a listen.
Just too little too late to provide that investment in the first place should have happened, and then the support should have happened. The government should have exercised its power to declare a national emergency, not just in New South Wales, but in Queensland when the event happened, not wait until it was too late.
Okay. And so too was the Premier.
The money needs to get out the door. You can't have a fund and not use it.
But right now, though, Anthony Albanese has not made his own national emergency declaration. He was asked about this when the plane landed today. Now, if you wouldn't play politics, it eventually catches up with you, doesn't it, Michael?
Well, it does, exactly as we were saying before. But, you know, again, Peter, I think, I'm sure you would concur with this. The problem here is we keep talking about what are we going to spend to fix up communities that we know are going to flood and are going to flood quite regularly. And I heard the New South Wales Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook, say, I think with Chris an hour or so ago, we spend 3% of the relevant money on mitigation, 97% on reaction. Well, I mean, that's Australia all up, isn't it? If it was the other way around, we might be actually heading in the right direction. So, look, whether there's a fund or not, whether it's activated or not, whether Albo triggers it or ScoMo, I think really, and I'm sure you'll concur, we're looking at this from the wrong end of the prism. What we need to do is start saying, be it some parts of Lismore or some parts of the Hawkesbury Nepean or indeed some parts of the city of Brisbane, heaven forbid, is it wise that we have dwellings, permanent dwellings, hundreds of thousands of people in some cases, in these known floodplain zones? And if it isn't, should we be actually moving some of these people and helping them financially, obviously, to do it, so that we're not just literally rinsing and repeating time and time again at an enormous cost?
Couldn't agree more. And of course, these people often now cannot get insurance. That makes it even more difficult for them. I might come back to that a bit later in the show.